everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's me, Francis, and I've got Davis Winkie back on to do a bit of a news roundup for us. It's been a minute, Davis, since we had you on, so how you doing?
I'm doing all right. You know, the Army is just the gift that keeps on giving to me, I guess.
You know, when I was in the Army, I didn't really pay as much attention. And now that I have a podcast that specifically kind of calls out some of the dumb shit that the Army does, it's very surprising. And part of me is like, has it always been like this? And more than likely, it always has. So, Davis, I brought you on. You've got a couple of stories that recently came out. One of them was my favorite because the part-timers, the National Guard and the reservists, the weekend warriors always hold a close part to my heart. I was a reservist for 20 years, so I never really had to do any of the real Army stuff. But apparently, there's a recent court order in Texas that could kind of change the way that the way that the National Guard is kind of structured and handled and all that. So give us a little breakdown about how exactly does the National Guard work? Because they dress up in the Army uniforms, but they're not really federal troops.
Yeah, so Francis, the uninitiated in your audience might think this is pretty complicated as we walk through it. And I assure them that the more you learn about it, it gets even more hopelessly complicated. So the National Guard is built on the constitutional bones of the state militias that have been around since the founding of the country, which means that the Guard, based on that and based on laws that were passed throughout the 20th century, answers to both the governor of their respective state, who controls them during their regular training periods, can control them for state missions like disaster response or response to things that aren't quite disasters. And then the Pentagon also holds control over them. And for things like overseas deployments, certain kinds of training, things like peacekeeping missions, which, Francis, we know those also like structurally work like deployments, but not everybody does. And the Pentagon also foots the bill for a lot of the things that the Guard does, even while under state control, which over the decades has kind of given them leverage to shape the Guard in the image of their full-time counterparts.
Right. It's the National Guard has kind of become a secondary Army reserve. Like, and some of the big fundamental differences, not only as you're talking about the funding, but the reserve doesn't really have combat components. We don't have infantry. We don't have tankers. Sure, we have engineers. Like, somebody will correct me that there's some kind of combat. Whatever. Shut up. There's no like.
Hey, I'll do it right now.
Well, okay, go ahead.
There's one infantry battalion in the Army Reserve. Half of it's in Hawaii. Half of it is in Washington State.
Which one is that?
I think it's the 100th Infantry Battalion.
Huh. Well, my point stands that we're not as combat heavy. We, like, when I deployed as a reservist to plug in holes where they needed people. However, the 34th Infantry Division, which is Minnesota National Guard, were the ones that were kind of in control of RC South RC. I don't remember which one I was in. East, I believe. But they were in charge of that area. They're the ones who kind of run missions. But then you've also got, like, we had Fire's team that were running, like, full missions. And that was the 172nd, I believe, while we were out there. So, National Guard gets plugged in. They can do overall commands because they are kind of they are structured very similarly to the active duty. But they just don't have to show up every day for work. They, do the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, which always threw me up because there's National Guard Special Forces and there's Army Reserve drill sergeant. So I don't know how any of that shit fucking works. Other than I heard the drill sergeant ones like, oh yeah, we went out and did like a 2 week or 2 week annual training. It was just like we rotated to train soldiers. And like, you just train soldiers for 2 weeks and then you go home. That's not. I'm glad that I had the same motherfuckers all through basic training because you learn them, and there's a lot easier to understand when you have them. So I don't understand how a lot of those things work, but functionally, the National Guard is supposed to be able to operate in very similar ways as the regular Army because it is in some ways considered the regular army of the state. In the Second Amendment, the militia that they need, that's the National Guard. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the National Guard's being intertwined with the federal government really is just kind of the last, I don't know, 50 years kind of thing. Like, it's always been kind of they've always been kind of working together, because the state obviously doesn't have a basic training facility to send them to, so they need to send them to Fort Sill or Knox or Leonard Wood or whatever. They got to send them out there. Feds pay the money for them to go out there. Fed pays the salary while they're out there. Fed pays whatever they need for AIT and everything. And that's all, great and hunky dory. But now it seems that at least Texas kind of wants to divorce itself away from that.
Yeah, and let me do a quick history lesson on how things came to be this way.
So World War One. No, go ahead.
Oh, hell, even before that, in the Spanish-American War at the end of the 19th century, the U.S. had to mobilize pretty quickly to fight Spain, even in some pretty near theaters like Cuba. I can't remember if there was fighting in Puerto Rico or not, but the regular army at that time was pretty small. And so they tried to source volunteers from the states that were to come out of the existing state militias. And I think a kind way to describe that mobilization process would be to call it a clusterfuck. It took people forever to get organized. Nobody had standardized weapons. They showed up and were sitting near Miami waiting to ship to Cuba, and just started dying of diseases and stuff. It was a real bad time. So in 1903, a guy who had been adjutant general of some state previously, who is now a senator, introduced legislation to standardize the militias, provide them federal funding, provide them federal kind of oversight and guidance to try to make sure that when they were needed, the product would be a little bit better. These are, I kid you not, referred to as the Dick Acts, after the guy who was doing them. So, and this only increased over time. The Guard got called up to chase Pancho Villa around on the U.S.-Mexico border, while World War I was going on in Europe. And the Congress actually passed a law that said, okay, now the feds can take the militia outside the United States. So then they could cross the border and keep chasing. And then also so they could all get spun up and sent to Europe once Mexico was done with. And the same thing happened with World War II, where the structure evolved in response to some of the shortcomings that were revealed when it needed to be used. And so what ultimately evolved was a system where the Guard has state control for much of its daily existence, but a lot of federal funding, a lot of federal organization, a lot of federal standards involved. And it was all founded on kind of this spirit of almost cooperative federalism, where it was hey, we trust that you're going to train these guys to the standard. We trust that you're going to comply with readiness requirements. And we trust that you're going to deliver combat ready forces in case we need them. And when the active duty forces started downsizing at the end of the Cold War, a lot of combat power was shifted into the National Guard. You've got several infantry divisions, you've got tank brigades, you've got a significant portion of the Army's combat power living under governor's control day to day. And Francis, the audience might not know this, but we do. The Guard was really, really heavily utilized throughout the War on Terror. Guys were deploying every 3, 4, 5 years with their Guard units to Iraq, to Afghanistan. They were taking casualties. Part-timers accounted for nearly half of the Army's deployment days during the War on Terror. And so this bargain has played out in a way where the Guard has become more useful for both governors because of all of this federal funding, equipment, and stuff, and for the feds because the feds don't have the end strength they need to be able to support all the missions that they are committed to around the world. And there was kind of this uneasy bargain between the two. And this recent court decision is starting to show some potential cracks in that arrangement.
Yeah. So I get reading through your story, what are some of the things that we can kind of expect? Because you and I have discussed the National Guard mission down on the Texas border and how it is slowly killing everybody who ends up having to go down there. Um, they're not being funded very well. They're bored. They're lonely. They're not being given any kind of like clear directive. They're not being paid very well. Because one thing, like I will always, if you're going to join the army, I tell you not to. But if you're going to join the army, don't join the National Guard. And I say that because I love my nasty girls as much as I love any other troops. But you like the federal government will dick you over. Being National Guard means either the Fed or the state can dick you over, and it happens all the time. Especially when it comes to money, especially when it comes to paying you to make sure that you don't get things like basic allowance for housing on when you get deployed. I know more than once as a reservist, we're like, oh, we have to go out for 29 days. Or no, it was 30 days because like past 30 days, you start to get Army benefits. And to keep that from happening, they cut us 2 sets of 15-day orders so that we weren't on a full month of training. We were on 2 weeks and then doing another 2 weeks of training right after it. So, you don't have to, the feds don't have to give you all this extra money. Now, I would also posit that this is an insane thing to do because we are no longer doing our big wars anymore. The federal government continues to give the Army just more money than God. And yet here, you're going to get yourself kind of financially shortchanged because, you're private snuffy and nobody gives a shit about you. So, and as you mentioned too, man, the National Guard was instrumental in a lot of things overseas. Depending on whether you agree with the wars or not, regardless of that, the National Guard was able to come on and do the job and run things very well. I love the 34th Infantry Division. Hated the 1st ID when they came in because the 34th was laid back. They got their shit done. They're really, really kind of decent people. 1st ID, not so much, but I've got a lot of chips on my shoulder with the 1st ID. So. But yeah, so what are we kind of looking at here? What's the what is Texas threatening to do? To say you can't use our troops anymore?
Well, it's not quite that, though. If we kind of put a pin in that, we could return to states trying to keep your hands off the Guard. That's a kind of a separate issue from this in particular. But Texas, in this case, sued the Biden administration in an effort to block the COVID-19 vaccine mandate for the National Guard. Yes, Congress has since repealed the COVID vaccine mandate for the entire Department of Defense, but the DoD has reserved the right to punish people who did not request an exemption and just refuse the vaccine order. And Texas is saying, hey, if you do that, you are infringing upon the state's exclusive authority to punish Guard members when they aren't called up under federal control. Even though you are cutting the checks right now, it is not up to you to, quote, govern my state militia right now, of which the National Guard, legally speaking, is a portion. And what happened was the judge at the district court level, which is where trials occur in the federal judiciary, initially said no when Texas asked for what's called a preliminary injunction, which blocks the federal government from doing something. Or in this case, would have blocked the federal government from enforcing the vaccine mandate on the Guard. And the district judge said no. Guardsmen have overlapping but simultaneous and legally distinct memberships in their state militia and their state National Guard. A 1990 Supreme Court case used a hat analogy. Every Guardsman has 3 hats in their closet. They can only wear one at a time. It's civilian hat, state militia hat, and Fed hat, which is actually a really helpful analogy. And the district judge ruled in line with that. But the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is known for being staffed with fairly conservative judges, overturned that decision with a lengthy opinion that looked at the Constitution and the historical debate around the state militias at that time, and basically said, hey, it's unconstitutional for the feds to try to make Gregg Abbott do something with this guardsman when they're not federalized, when they're not put under the Pentagon's control. And where this starts to get tricky is if this precedent expands to include the entire country, there's the chance that your governor, no matter which party they align with, someday when the Defense Department, with its politically appointed leaders, makes a personnel policy or something that you disagree with, you could potentially now have the legal top cover to say, nah, I'm not going to do that. This is unconstitutional. You can't make me do that. Like, say if there's another Trump administration and they say, we want to make the Guard discharge all of its trans service members, which that's a very real possibility. A blue state governor might say, no, we're not gonna do that, and you can't punish my people for not following it. And under this judge's logic, that's the way it is, which it opens the door for performative politics to possibly play a larger role in the way the military runs. And the only option the DoD has, according to this judge, is to defund or yank units out of a rogue state's National Guard. And in a world where the Pentagon needs the Guard to even tie its shoes on a daily basis, we're entering mutually assured destruction territory here.
Didn't you get yelled at for saying that on Twitter?
I don't even know. I try not to pay attention to that bird app anymore. But if you think about it, man, you can saber rattle all you want, but if you pull all funding from the Texas National Guard, you just lost an infantry division. You just lost 2 infantry brigades. You just lost one of the National Guard's only airborne infantry battalions, which is, they're actually deployed right now in Kosovo.
Are they jumping out of airplanes?
No, but they may be about to put their border lessons to work when dealing with the Serbs. So like the National Guard is so thoroughly involved in like day-to-day operations for the Pentagon at home and abroad. And if you add like swirling political calculus into the mix, that could potentially take away from the military's ability to respond to crises or to even be able to adequately plan over time to employ the Guard in the manner it has. It just shows the cracks in the system that has been created over the years, according to the experts who talked to me.
So does the federal government have any kind of recourse here other than we'll stop giving you money if you do this?
Within the context of this lawsuit, they could hypothetically have appealed this deny or this particular decision to the Supreme Court, though it's not even the trial decision yet. We're still more than a year from seeing this actual trial resolve if it plays out. So there's still more that could come in the courtroom here. But when it comes to, let's say this becomes the law of the land, so to speak, that the Pentagon cannot compel governors to punish their troops for anything that they've done when not federalized. The only recourse is to use the stick, according to this judge, like we talked about, taking away funding or taking away units. And that's something that hasn't even been threatened since the late 80s, when blue governors were trying to tell the Reagan administration, hey, you can't send my guys to Central America. I don't like you supporting the Contras. And the Supreme Court in 1990 voted 9-0 to say, actually, the feds can do that. But, today, this judge who wrote this decision is, kind of a originalist, conservative-minded judge who probably reflects the composition of the Supreme Court right now. We could see a fundamental change in who has what authority over the National Guard and when. And probably the most interesting line in this Fifth Circuit opinion was this judge saying, yeah, the federal government might be correctly interpreting these laws, but that doesn't matter if they're unconstitutional. And so, like, the very, like, bedrock of laws, like, since the start of the 20th century, that the National Guard was built on, this 330 something thousand soldier organization that did like a third of the Army's entire lift over a 20-year war, might be built on a series of unconstitutional laws. And we might see different challenges to them now.
I do love that we have created for ourselves a society in which 9 people can make a decision, and then 30 years later, 9 other people can say, no, not anymore. That's not how it works. But, you know, I understand the argument. Like, in some ways, I do kind of get, like, hey, maybe the states should have some kind of, like, civilian or some kind of, like, hey, we'll pay you, show up 1 week in a month to do training on how to fill sandbags, how to do these things, and then leave the soldiering to the Army, to the Fed. Now, which I know also goes against all of the originalist kind of thinking that we're going through here. Honestly, if in the year 2023 you're trying to still interpret what Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson would have wanted, go fuck yourself. For many reasons, but also because it's 200 plus years later. Like, these guys didn't know dinosaurs existed, man. Like, they didn't start discovering dinosaurs until the 1800s. They didn't have airplanes back then. They didn't have cars. They didn't have any of this shit. So, going by an originalist kind of point of view, it only ever seems to kind of be pointed towards the militia, but also a militia for the Second Amendment has a particular, like, militia means something. A militia doesn't mean you with a gun in a state and you're calling yourself a militia. So, and I mean, look, I'm a gun owner, so I'm not here to argue about should you or shouldn't you own a gun. I will argue about how stupid originalism is and how it tends to kind of backfire on us on a regular basis. And that's just a little insight into the country that you may or may not live in. If you don't live here, I'm sorry, we influence you in other dumber and incredibly stupid ways.
Yeah, man. I can't agree or disagree with a lot of what you're saying, given my day job. But what I can say is that I spoke with the law professor at the University of Illinois who was cited very heavily by the judge in this legal opinion that laid out the ruling, the reasoning behind it, etc. And this guy said, hey, as a work of, like, historical analysis and originalist thought, he gets the story right about the state militia. He correctly understands the militia clauses. But this same professor and the other expert I spoke with questioned whether, is originalism the right philosophical lens through which we need to be looking at the National Guard, which is, like, the bedrock, or a significant portion of the bedrock of American national defense. That also, as the COVID pandemic revealed, the Guard is kind of like our emergency safety net for everything from manning food banks, substitute teachers, school buses, unemployment claims, you name it. The Guard probably did it on FEMA's dime during the pandemic.
You know what we need? Did you ever see the movie Waterloo in the 70s?
No, I'm not cultured.
It's fine. It's a Russian film that they managed to shoot, and, like, this is before CGI but they still had, like, the massive amount of bodies that you need to fill in, like, a Napoleonic era, battlefield. So thousands and thousands and thousands of people, because they just went to the Russian army and said, hey, you conscripts, come here, put these uniforms on, mill about a little bit. We're going to videotape you. That's what we need to do with the National Guard. No more of this hiring somebody and their uniforms look all fucked up. Just go get the National Guard, nationalize them for, like, a 3-day movie shoot or something. Give them give them state pay, and then hopefully after that, maybe they can get inducted into the Screen Actors Guild or whatever. Look, I'm trying to come up with better uses for our National Guard here. But you are correct. Like, it is a body of people that we can just kind of grab and say, hey, we need people that can stand here and direct traffic. And we know, and it already has a hierarchy built in. It already has a funding mechanism built in. It's already got a logistics system built in that maybe you need to adjust, but you don't need to build from scratch. So the National Guard, incredibly important just on, on that kind of local state level. This is going to be an interesting fight, though. I can honestly, I see the responses on both sides, because if you're trying to say, well, no, they should be there, you already provided a great example of, do we want to send National Guard down to Central America to get messy with the Contras? No, we don't. We don't want to do that. That's fucked up. Those states were right to kind of pull back from it. So it's I don't have an answer for it. I just thought this was a very interesting kind of court ruling, and the way, the National Guard and the reserves and the active duty guys work, it's all a little bit different.
Yeah, man. And, it's like the militia clauses in the Constitution themselves emerged from very intense disagreement over whether the states needed to be allowed to maintain the ability to hold off or overcome the federal government if necessary. It was concerns over state and federal power sharing that kind of created this structure. And what's old is new again, it seems.
Yeah, I worry about, though, because somebody's going to get that idea and they're going to say, well, if we need to hold back the federal government, we need nukes. So a literal rogue state with nukes, like Missouri has Whiteman Air Base in it, so it wouldn't be difficult for us to take over and just start World War III, I suppose. It would be Missouri. I could see it. Let's talk about a couple of other things, Davis. One thing that I've been seeing a lot, and I haven't gotten a chance to really dig into it with anybody, so hopefully you can. What the fuck's happening with the ACFT?
Oh my God. So, Francis, I for a brief moment, when I realized that the Senate wanted to change the Army's fitness tests again, for a brief moment, I considered resigning from my job.
Wait, which job? Your Army job, or your reporting on
I'm
the
not
Army
in the
job?
Army anymore.
Oh, okay. I thought you almost
I've
left.
Fled to greener pastures.
You almost left Army Times. Why? If they're giving you such great content, why leave now?
Okay, so the deep background on this is that the Army over recent years implemented what's called the Army Combat Fitness Test to replace its old fitness test, which was the Army Physical Fitness Test. The old test was, Francis, actually, you described the APFT experience. Describe for me the platonic form of an APFT.
So I, unfortunately, because I was a competent NCO in my unit, I got tasked with doing ACFTs pretty much every drill weekend. Because we always had stragglers, we always had people that needed makeups, we always had somebody who's going to school, so you need to run an APFT. The APFT is easy to run. You've got a script that you read. It's 2 minutes of push-ups. The push-up form is very well known to soldiers. The sit-up form is very well known. You just have to find 2 miles that you can run. The APFT is very simple to conduct. Now, does it tell you how well your soldiers are ready for combat? Absolutely not. You're never going to get shot at and immediately need to do 57 sit-ups in under 2 minutes. Just not going to happen. Now, maybe you do need to yeet a large stone over your head to throw it at a person. That's where the ACFT comes in, the Army Combat Fitness Test. Now, the ACFT was being talked about when I was leaving. So APFT was still, I got out in what it was that October 2020, I believe, and COVID fucked up a lot of things, but I believe October 2020 was when it was supposed to switch over to the ACFT, and we're gonna spend a year doing ACFTs to get a feel for it, and then after that, it was supposed to be the test of record, I guess. That hasn't happened. I know that the ACFT has been used. Did you take the ACFT?
Yeah, so the ACFT did eventually make it to become the test of record, but not without some serious intervention from Congress. They needed to see an independent study of how it would impact of how it would impact women, how it would impact certain career fields. Because the general idea behind the ACFT at first was moving beyond this one-dimensional fitness test, as Army folks like to describe it, of the old one. Moving beyond that to one that was initially supposed to be gender neutral, age neutral, actually test things that are better indicators of fitness than like, how many push-ups can you do after a smoke break? Like the ACFT has hand release push-ups. It has a plank. It has a sprint drag carry where you're running with a sled and then with kettlebells that simulate ammo cans. It has a deadlift. It has something else that I'm forgetting right now, and a 2-mile run. It's really kind of the overhead power ball throw or standing power throw. The overhead yeet is the one I forgot. It's supposed to be like a fuller understanding of fitness, and at first it was supposed to be gender and age neutral. Congress didn't like that because they thought it would disproportionately impact women. They thought it might derail the integration of women into combat arms units, which are pretty valid concerns given the test data that there was. And so what the Army did was they kind of threw up their hands and said, okay, we're just going to go back to norming it by age and gender. So they kept the same test with the same events, except like every age group separated by gender has a different scoring scale. And that's the way that the old APFT was. So basically the end result was like you go from a okay fitness test that was easy to do to a great fitness test that has a lot of kit and caboodle you need to set up with the deadlift bars, the sleds, all of that stuff. And last year, the Senate in its defense policy bill had a provision saying that the Army needed to implement some kind of gender neutral standards for combat arms units. The Army thought it satisfied that requirement when it added a fitness test requirement with gender neutral standards to the expert infantry badge testing gamut. The Senate, it seems, disagreed. And so the current draft of the fiscal 2024 defense policy bill from the Senate includes a provision that would kill the new PT test, put the old one back, and then create a mandatory waiting period before the Army could even do a new one again. And with it's like making them click the undo button several times and then micromanaging them every step of the way forward. And I'll tell you what, man, were there problems with the way the Army rolled this out? Absolutely. Are there real concerns about the availability of training and equipment for part-time members, especially? Definitely. But would it be throwing a hand grenade into every admin section of every Army unit across the country if they were to overnight kill the PT test and replace it with the old one? Because this, your score on the fitness test factors into promotions. Mm-hmm. It factors into your job evaluations. It factors into so many damn things.
You can't go to school without passing a PT test.
Exactly. And so it would just be throwing it into admin chaos.
Yeah. I can understand. I believe I saw a couple people say, I don't know what's going on because I have a soldier going to school. They have a recent ACFT, but now I'm being told that doesn't count. And they don't know what to do. And first off, I'm amazed that the Senate is pushing back on something, but not due to woke reasons. But secondly, I also just don't understand why the Senate is involved in this anyway. Let the Army figure its shit out. I feel like we've kind of always figured it out. And then you have 100 people who have no real, they're not involved in it. I don't think how is the Senate involved in this? Why is the Senate involved in this?
Well,
I get it's a federal group. The Senate is going to have some kind of say in it, but the fitness test really feels like a weird thing for us to be arguing over for 3 years just to go back to a thing that we know doesn't work.
So, one of the reasons why Congress is so involved in things like fitness testing is because your fitness test performance just determines so much within your Army career. It impacts promotions. If you fail it enough times, they'll kick you out unless you're a part timer, in which case they'll overlook that probably because they need you on the books more than they need people to actually be physically fit. Um, like it's kind of a forcing mechanism where, say if you strongly believe that women don't belong in combat arms units unless they can hack it, a way to ensure that women can physically hack it in this unit under the conception that some people have about what being able to hack it means, because, there's no way Audie Murphy could have carried me off a battlefield at 6'6", 250. Like the fitness test is a really logical point at which to kind of keep fighting that battle over the place that women have in combat and in combat oriented units.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, like, the fitness test is kind of the centerpiece of an Army-wide effort to transform the way it approaches health and fitness. Army fitness culture for the longest time was just run people to death and do a bunch of stimulants. And they're
whomst among us.
Yeah, I know, right? But like after years and years of like overuse injuries and stuff, like making it really hard to have folks stay healthy and stay deployable and enjoy their lives after service. The Army has kind of come around on the fact that they need to actually make sure people are fit and actually do physical training in a sane manner. And the PT test, again, is the forcing mechanism at the heart of this. Because what does every individual soldier need to do? They need to pass the PT test. And so if they need to train a certain way to pass a certain kind of PT test, you need to make sure that's the standard they're being evaluated on. You need to give them that incentive to train the way you want them to train if you're worried that the way they used to train had bad consequences, as the Army seems to have realized. What I think the funniest impact, though, of this would be, like, in the small chance that this makes it through Congress and the PT test has to change again. Because, I'm not a betting man, but if I had $5 that I was willing to bet, I would bet $5 that the Senate Armed Services Committee is just using this as a negotiation chip with somebody. Whom? I don't know. What are they trying to negotiate? Not sure. But that's the way that Congress works, man. But like, if this were to happen, the funniest thing to me would be the change in the 2-mile run time standard. For the old Army physical fitness test, my last age and gender bracket that I ran in as like a 21 to 25-year-old male or whatever, or maybe 26 to 29, I don't remember it. I knew that I needed to run 2 miles in 16 minutes, 36 seconds or faster. But when the new ACFT was implemented, that time got stretched out, I want to say, to like 1930. And that actually makes a really big difference. Like, if you're just like casually fit, you can jog a couple of 9-minute miles and be fine. But to pass that old APFT, man, you had to be moving. And that was the thing that most people would fail, would be the run, because it's just so damn fast. Now, if everybody's been training like actual athletes and focusing more on like strength and power, as opposed to like the zero-sum game of I either run fast or die trying that the old PT test kind of forced, it would be extremely funny to watch people need to be 3 minutes faster overnight. I just want to know, like, how many, like, what proportion of the Army would fail the APFT run tomorrow if they had to do it? I say 50% after 3 years of training for the ACFT.
Yeah, I guess that's curious. Like, I've never really considered the big change in the time run, because I lived and died by that, minimum, because I'm not. I enjoy running. I do not enjoy running fast. I enjoy putting on my headphones and going for a light jog for 2.5 miles in 30 minutes. I enjoy an ACFT 2 mile. So I feel like if I had to, I could, but also I'm 40 now, so like my 2 mile run is probably already 19 minutes anyway, from the old APFT standards. But yeah, it is going to be, it's, as you said, an admin nightmare, but it's also going to be a nightmare for anybody who's just, trying to get their soldiers promoted or trying to get them sent to school or something. There's not going to be that thing there for them. Now, when I did go to some of my schools, they give you a PT test before and after. So if you failed the one before, they'll give you a chance to pass the next one, and they're making you do PT every morning anyway. So you got to try real hard to not pass a PT test when you're forced to do PT every morning for 2 months or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some people manage it. I don't know how. The same thing for like failing a drug test on a military base. Where are you getting drugs, man? Like,
well, and if you look at it, like the kinds of fitness for the two tests are extremely different. Like I said earlier, I'm a pretty big guy, 6'6", 250. For a while, I was I had a stint where I was one of the worst football players in Division I college football. So like I always trained towards like athletic power, explosiveness, those kinds of things. And for me, the old PT test was always kind of close because I had to go down really far on my push-ups and do them really fast.
mm-hmm.
And for me, it was always touch and go of whether I was going to pass the push-ups on the APFT.
Yeah, you guys with them gangly arms, man.
I even failed it at my at cadet camp before I commissioned. I failed it the first time, and so like throughout the rest of that training camp, I was like we would be in a patrol base at night, getting harassed by the active duty dudes who are there just to mess with cadets all summer as Op 4. Which a quick aside, small world. I met a guy who'd been on my high school football team who was enlisted and did the Op 4, who I actually took him prisoner in one of the training lanes. But like I was doing
best job in the Army.
I was doing push-ups in the patrol bases, and I managed to pass the last PT test of the camp, which is good because I liked having health insurance.
Sure.
But like when the ACFT got implemented, and it had a lot of stuff oriented towards strength, power, explosiveness, I went from being a borderline pass, as I was on the old test, to somebody where I scored, above 90% on 4 out of the 6 events. Just because of the fundamental difference in the kind of fitness that it was trying to go for.
Yeah, a deadlift is an incredible like thing to add in, and I like that there was the hex deadlift too. It wasn't the one that tears up your shins when you do it wrong. So yeah, I also like when I was getting out, I could see the clusterfuck that was changing over, but also I appreciated all the changes that they were doing. That we did have before I left. One of the last probably the last APFT I took, the sergeant major was talking about the ACFT, and he said that because one of the things was the leg tuck. You got to hold on to a bar, and you got to bring your legs up to your chest, which not easy, not easy to do, especially when that's not something that you've trained to do. And he said that women had an easier time with that. Because they had more abdominal muscles because they give birth. And that was a very strange, like, everybody just kind of gave him a quizzical look on that one. It's like, I don't think that's how any of that works, my man. And in fact, the exact opposite is true. Women are having problems with it, especially after they've had a kid. Because guess what? Those abdominal muscles kind of get fucked up in pregnancy sometimes. Not all the times, but sometimes. And, not all of the events are really going to be fair to everybody else. And I kind of wish I could go and take an ACFT now. I'd be interested to go through it just because, like I said, I ran so many APFTs, but also like I always knew, and you mentioned it too, what a clusterfuck it's always going to be to try to get all of that stuff out when you're a part-time, your reserve unit. Like our reserve area didn't have a track that we could run on. Like most of your active duty places have tracks all over the place, and they have big exercise fields. This is a field. Here's a track. You run the track this many times for 2 miles. You can do whatever else you need here in the grass. But as part timers, we're in like my drill, the building I did my drill weekends in, or battle assembly, what they call them now, was in one of the worst parts of St. Louis City. Not the worst part. The worst part is about half a mile to the north of us. No comfortable area to go do any of this stuff. The only place that we could go, we'd have to like go to. There's a local high school that we could go run the track. Problem being that the tracks there are all in meters. They're not, meant for. But it was just like 8 times around. That's 2-ish miles. So we'll go with that. So you already know, it's just like, well, nobody gives a shit about this PT test. But you can't cart all this stuff out and wreck somebody else's field with all of it. So
yeah, it's tough. Like I never knew how laws of physics problems for the part timers on it. But like if senior leaders have decided that the benefits outweigh kind of the pain in the ass, that's their prerogative. Obviously, me and the media, I'm going to report on, like those issues, what could come of them, what the impacts could be. But that seems to be what they've settled on, that yes, this is a pain in the ass, but the net impact is better than, outweighs that. But, that being said, let me tell you about the one ACFT I took, Francis.
All right. Tell me.
So at the time I was stationed in Asheville, North Carolina, which, it just broke my heart to have to spend a weekend in Asheville every month. Let me just tell you. And the state had funding at the time for you to stay in hotels on drill weekends. Just terrible, terrible stuff. We went to a local park that also had like a massive cycling track at it and one baseball field. And we went out on that baseball field in the outfield and destroyed it with the sleds for the sprint drag carry. Mm-hmm. And in the bullpen, that was where we had the deadlifts set up with like pre-done weights and stuff. And so we did all that stuff on the baseball field, kind of tore it up a little bit. And then the 2-mile run, man, that park was next to a piece of a greenway that went along the French Broad River there in Asheville. But this was a public use greenway, and it went through an RV park, and it wasn't completely flat either. And so we went 1 mile out, 1 mile back on the greenway, having to dodge like some strollers, having to dodge people like stumbling out of their RVs to like go fetch water for their coffee or whatever, and make it back. And I was mad because I ended up on my run 3 seconds short of like the score I had wanted or whatever. And I decided to, like emotionally for myself, rather than blame the fact that I could have gotten one more point on literally any of the other events, I decided to blame the people pushing strollers instead.
You know what? It's all cumulative. I'm sure if those people hadn't been pushing the strollers, you probably would have gotten it. We went to a local park in Ferguson because the high school didn't want us there anymore because we fucked up their field. So we went to a local park. It had like a walking trail around it. And it was nice and flat, but it was not like one time around is X amount. It was just somebody had to go out there with the little wheelie dude and walk around for 2 miles to see where 2 miles was. So it was always, you have to do 3 full laps around this thing and then like a little eighth of a lap here. And this is before ACFT. So we weren't fucking up the fields. We did our push-ups in the tennis courts, push-ups and sit-ups in the tennis courts. Sometimes we remembered to bring out mats for you to lay on. And we had the same thing. It wasn't like, luckily it was a small closed loop. It was less than a mile. So we didn't get like bicyclists or anything. Mostly what we had were like the Sunday morning, it's nice out, I'm going to go for a walk kind of people. And we also had a small unit. So like even when all of us were doing a PT test, it was less than 100 people. So it was probably less than 50 if I'm being honest, just because it was a small unit. So we kind of got by with that stuff. But I can't imagine how they pulled off ACFTs since then. I know the last time I was in was a couple years at this point when I was dropping off whatever TA-50 I still had left, and the supply sergeant, she was just like, "Yeah, we haven't done any of that nonsense. We're not doing any of it. Nobody has the money for that. Nobody has the time for it. You have to send people to class to be able to like give the test. Like it can't just be at least with the APFT, just like grab an NCO, grab an officer, grab a timer, grab a witness, grab
Well,
your
it used to be
guy.
a really good use for cadets if
Yeah.
you had any cadets laying around.
Yeah, they're perfect. Like, hey, go and stare at a wall for me. That's what you're good for. I need an officer to stare at a wall. Come here, cadet. Unfortunately, it always ended up being me also doing it because, like I said, I knew where to get the keys to go drive to the place. I knew I knew where all the stuff was, and they're like, Francis will do it. Sergeant Horton will do it. It's fine. So yeah, APFT, ACFT. We'll see how it goes. Maybe some kind of hybrid thing will be in there. Maybe not. How does the Sergeant Major of the Army feel about it?
I spoke with him kind of a few days after this dropped, and what the Army's top NCO was telling me and the other reporters was that they've done too much to try to transform Army fitness culture for it to be derailed like this. Without directly calling out the senators who had approved this amendment to the bill, which again may not be in the final law, and according to some of my sources, probably won't be. But without calling them out, he said, "Look, like this is going to damage the health and fitness of the Army because, like I was saying earlier, if you no longer have the test be reflective of the culture that you're trying to build, where is the built-in incentive for troops to train the way you want them to? They're just going to go back to running all the time and do PT every morning. Is just like like a pyramid of push-ups, a pyramid of sit-ups, and a warm-up and cool-down run. Like it's going to be like going back to the Stone Age from a fitness perspective. Was kind of the bottom line of what he was saying.
We're gonna go back to what it was when I joined, when it was drill sergeant's discretion. Like we didn't even have what's the morning exercises called now?
PRT.
PRT. Yeah, we didn't have PRT. We did that goofy like partner based PT where you have to put like your legs on somebody's back and do push-ups and shit. It was really terrible. Like fitness for the Army has come a long way in just the 20 years since 23 years since I joined back in the day. And I know since the 90s even more. So it is good to see that, over a long period of time, there's changes, and it would be unfortunate if they have to revert. But you can't make everybody happy. Like I said, as a reservist, I see it being a massive clusterfuck and really shooting a lot of reserve component in the feet. Maybe they can kind of keep the APFT just for like the part-timers. Be like, look, it's easy. You guys can knock it out on a weekend whenever. Perfectly fine. But nobody's elected me to be in charge of the Army yet. So get on that. Go vote. Francis, charge of the Army. I don't know how that works, actually.
South Carolina, for their National Guard, their adjutant general, so their top general, until like 2010 was direct elected by the people.
Hell yeah.
And
we need to return.
And I need to double check this. So anybody out there, I'm not certain if it's changed in the past 4 years or not. But as recently as 2019, I want to say, Vermont still selects their top general by secret ballot of the state legislature. So like there could still yet be a path for you, Francis.
We'll hold out. I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed. Davis, thank you so much for coming on to the show. As always, thanks for talking about your stories. You can read all of Davis's stuff on Army Times and follow him at Davis_Winkie on Twitter, if Twitter is still around by the time this comes out. We'll see. We're all waiting with bated breath for us to try to log on and be free.
Yeah, man. I think I need to go do push-ups now.
Go to all the way down, flat plane. Don't give me those bitch ups. Give me push ups. All right, Davis, thank you. Everybody, thank you for listening. As always, you can get more of this on our Patreon, patreon.com/hellofaway. You can follow me at Army Strang, follow Nate at In These Deserts. You can get stuff in the store, hellofawaytodie.com, all kinds of things. And as always, if you don't have any money, we understand reviews are always free, especially if they're nice reviews. Please only give us nice reviews. Tell us how much you love us. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next week.